Hello and welcome back to the final episode in our Golang crash course. My name is Chris Franklin. So in this final episode, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about functions within Go and how to use them. Specifically, we're going to be talking about functions and closures and what we can use them for and how we can use them to start creating some more advanced features within the language. Now, as I mentioned, this is the last episode in our crash course. There's still a lot more that you can learn within the language. We're not going to cover every aspect of the language here. So if you want to follow along with that, just let me know in the comments. I'm working on a new course as we speak that will jump into some of the more advanced aspects of Go. So if you're interested in that, let me know down below. Or hopefully by the time you're watching this, I'll have at least a few episodes within that already completed. All right, with that, let's dive straight in here and start working on functions. So what I'm going to start with is I'm going to start with just a really simple function here. So as we mentioned before in previous episodes, a function definition is consisting of four major parts. The first is the actual func keyword to tell us that this is a function declaration. Next, we do the name of the function itself. We're going to call this one hello. Then inside of the parentheses, we put any arguments we want to pass in here. So that's the third aspect of a function. And finally, we have the return type. If this is blank, that means there is no return. If otherwise, you actually put the type here that you want to send back out. Then you do your open brackets, and inside you do your actual function declaration, or your definition itself. So in this case, all we're going to do is we're going to return the phrase hello. Okay, so this is a really simple function. All we're doing is saying hello. We're not taking anything else in here. And this way we can have ourselves a really nice, simple way of grabbing out a string. Now, if we wanted to get fancy here, we could do a second function, and this one we'll call hola. So if we want to greet in Spanish, we can do that. And then we can just return the phrase hola. So now we have two functions, both serving the same purpose of saying hello in two different languages. Okay, so we can start using this now. The very first thing we can do is by just taking and replacing this here, we're going to replace the hello world here with two things. We're going to say hola, and then we're going to say comma space world exclamation point. So we're going to do this, and then here, or let's do hello, sorry. Let's start with hello, and we'll actually call the function, and then we're going to run this, okay? And we're just going to verify that everything is working as we expect it to. Oops, go run dot, not row run, row. Oh my goodness, if I could type, this would go so much smoother, wouldn't it? Go run dot. There we go. Hello world. So as you can see, we're combining in our print line two things happening in line here. So we're saying hello colon hello parentheses comma, and then we're sending the second string that we want to print out. Okay, that's fine. But what if we want to have a single way of deciding? Are we going to say hola or hello? But we want a single function to enclose all of that. Well, the fun thing about functions is that within the language of Go, they are actually things that we can pass around. We can pass around pointers to the actual function itself and execute it from other places. So let's see what this looks like. I'm going to create a new function, and I'm going to call this my greet function. Okay, and inside of here, I'm going to pass in the actual greeting I want to use. How do I do that? Well, I give it a name, and then just like all of our other types, I have to give it what I want to take in. In this case, I want to take in a function, and the function is going to return a string. So we tell it what we're passing in. We could also, within these parentheses, give it, if we had parameters that we passed in, we would pass those in here within here. Okay? So now we're going to say this is how we declare that we are passing a function into another function. And then I can say, I also want to take a name, and I'm going to return out of this a string. Okay, so this looks pretty complicated, but it's pretty straightforward. Where our greet function takes in a function g that returns a string and a name, and then the whole thing returns a string. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to return, and I'm going to call whatever function gets passed in. I'm going to add a space, and then I'm going to add the name. And I'm going to return all this. This is going to be a new string that we return out. So what is this going to look like? If I come down here and I say fmt.println, I can pass in greet, and I can call this, and then I can tell it which function I want to pass in. So I want to pass in hola now. And then I am going to pass in my name. Okay? And that's it. That's all I'm going to do. So if I run this now, you'll now see I have hello world, and then I also have hola Chris. Okay? It's pretty straightforward what's happening here. We're just taking the hola function that we declared here. So this is the name of the function. We're passing it in by reference, and we're saying call hola here. So we're in this case, G is hola. And so it's just like we're doing this here. Okay? All right, so that's an interesting way of being able to pass functions in and execute them within the scope of another function. But what if I want to reuse this all over the place? What if I want to say, I want to call greeting all the time? I want to say greet, 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 just over and over again. But I don't want to have to pass in hola every single time. Well, we can use what is called a closure for doing this exact same thing here, but now we can store within the closure which of these functions we want to be able to pass in. And then we can return the function back out of the closure and keep that as a reference ourselves. So that sounds complicated, but let's look at what this actually looks like. So I'm going to create greet2, okay? And greet2 is just going to take a string, okay? So I'm going to take the greeting string, and then I am going to return out a function that takes a string that returns a string. Okay? So as I said, up here, if we were passing our function around within the parentheses, we put the types as the argument. This is what I'm talking about here. We don't give it a name. We just say we're returning out a function that takes a string type. Okay? And then the whole thing returns a string. So I'm going to close this here. Now, inside of a closure, we can store variables that get carried along whenever we execute the returned function. Okay. So in this case, we're going to store the greeting that we're passing in here. Okay. And that we're passing it in as a string, in this case G. Okay. Now, I want to return a new function, and I'm going to do an inline function here. So I'm going to say func, and I'm going to take name and string. Okay. So name is a string, and I'm going to return out a string. And then so this is what's called an anonymous inline function. We don't give it a name. We just declare the function inline there. And then as part of this, I'm going to return the greeting plus and plus name. Okay? Oops. N-A-M-E. Okay. Now, here's how we do this. Okay? So now I have a way of taking in a string greeting that I want to use. Okay? And then I am going to return back out a function. So I'm going to store this string in here. And then I'm going to return a function that takes a name, and then I can call the greeting plus the name. So let's actually see what this looks like when I use it. Okay, so I'm going to create hello1 and hello2, and I am going to declare greet2 with hola, and then I'm going to create greet2 with hello. Okay? So I'm going to pass in I'm going to execute this function, and what I'm going to get back out of this function is another function. So h1 is a function and h2 is a function. Now I can call fmt.println on h1, and I'm going to say, oops, that got a little weird. Okay, so I'm going to call h1, and I'm going to pass in a name, and let's say Steve for now. Okay, and then I'm going to copy this, I'm going to paste it, and I'm going to do the same thing for h2. Okay, so I'm going to pass in Steve as the name for both of those. I'm going to save all of this, and then I'm going to run it. And what we'll see is that we get hola Steve and hello Steve down here. So what we're calling here is we're saying call h1, which is the function returned here, with the name Steve. And h1 was set up by greet2 Ola. So greet2 Ola gets passed in here as the string and gets saved as a local variable called greeting. This variable is restricted to everything inside of this function. You won't be able to use greeting outside of this function. Okay. So it's saved in here, and then when we actually execute h1, we're saying run function with the name passed in, so the name is Steve, and return a string that is a combination of greeting plus a space plus the name that we pass in. So in this case, Ola space Steve. That's it. That's closures in a nutshell. Okay? This is a super powerful way of creating and assembling really complex builder functions. Basically something like a factory that will allow you to have a function that generates more functions. Okay? So when you use the factory pattern in other languages, this is really what it is within Go. You have a way of defining a set of shared scope within that single function. So that it will memorize, in this case, greeting. And every time you use h1 from that point forward, it will know I need to reuse the same greeting every single time. You can do something very similar to this, but instead of storing a string, you can do this here where we pass in a function that returns a string and then just save greeting with G and then here replace greeting with greeting like this. You could do the exact same thing if you wanted to reuse these functions up above and do something like this. So you can get really complicated here with what you're doing and passing around. So hopefully this makes sense. If you need any clarification, please put a message down below in the comments. I'll make sure to answer any comments that show up in here. I'm also going to be, as I mentioned at the beginning, coming out with more advanced lessons as part of a more advanced Golang tutorial series. So make sure you follow along with that, and that way you'll understand this in a much more depth. Okay? Thank you all so much for watching this tutorial series. I really hope you stick around and watch more. Hit that subscribe button if you really like this content, and let me know in the comments if you have any suggestions or things you want to see next. Thank you all so much. I'll see you later.